Everyone was laughing at the barbecue when the first scream shattered the calm. And within seconds, old man Carlton, a 73-year-old veteran, was on the ground, blood dripping from his nose, slapped brutally by a biker hired as so-called HOA. Security, that moment, that's when everything changed. Because just behind that fence, hidden by forest and time, was the lever, the one they didn't know about, the one that opened the dam I built with my bare hands. And by the time I pulled it, 35 houses floated like paper boats. The moment that slap landed, the cameras caught my silhouette walking away. And what happened next? It made headlines around the world. But to understand why I did what I did, you need to know how it started, how they stole what was mine, how they erased my name off a land deed my grandfather signed with ink and sweat, and why I promised myself I'd never walk away quiet. I was born on that land. 6 acres of green valley carved between 2 rocky hills in upstate Arizona. My granddad fought in Korea and bought that land with military savings in 1961. He taught me how to trap water using gravity-fed streams, how to find copper veins with a magnet, how to shoot straight and think straighter. After he died, I stayed. I built a dam in the canyon by hand, filled it slow each season, reinforced it with concrete, and buried the release lever under an old tool shed. It was more than a dam, it was insurance, legacy, and a secret. That land was mine by blood, and by every state document filed back in '72 until 5 years ago. When I came back from volunteering with Habitat for Humanity in Honduras and found a brand new asphalt road slicing through my field like a scar dot at first, I thought it was a mistake. New houses were rising, fast, cheerful signs, American flags, neighbors smiling. But when I drove down the old cattle road toward my cabin, 2 HOA guys in khaki stopped me. They told me this was private property. I laughed. Showed them the title deed. They looked confused. Called a supervisor. That night I got my first letter, cease and desist all occupancy. Apparently the county records had changed. A new LLC, Glenhaven Estates Development, had purchased the entire block including my land through a shell acquisition. I wasn't notified, wasn't paid nothing. They claimed I'd been unreachable for years, that I'd abandoned it. I tried to fight back, hired a lawyer from Flagstaff. He lasted 3 weeks before quitting mysteriously. Then came the code violations, unregistered dam, outdated septic, unzoned fencing. Fines stacked up faster. Then the trees grew, the HOA mailed warnings. Then they started sending their security, guys with biker jackets and steel-toed boots patrolling in golf carts. When I told them to leave, they reported me for aggressive threats. Police came twice. But they never saw the hidden trail I'd made, the one leading to my grandfather's cave, where every document was sealed in plastic, every tape of land transfer recorded, and every damn blueprint stashed. Then, on July 4th, everything snapped. They threw a party, Glenhaven BBQ Bash, open invite. My mailbox filled with flyers, come celebrate the best HOA in the county. That was the final insult. They'd built 35 houses on my soil, poured their pools on my grass, named their dog park after their president's wife. And now they wanted to party on my bloodline? I didn't show up empty-handed. I walked through that party with a GoPro strapped to my chest, my father's army dog tags around my neck, and a court envelope in my hand. When I approached Carlton, my only ally in the neighborhood, they stopped me. A biker named Lance slapped him to the ground like some mafia show-off. That slap echoed through time. That slap activated something deep. I turned without a word, walked through the trail, unlocked the shed, and pulled the lever dot. No one noticed at first. But when the first row of houses lost power and a roaring sound filled the valley, people looked west. What they saw was nature's vengeance. The dam had been building for years. Water didn't trickle, it surged. Mud, debris, force. Panic. Spread like fire. Cars reversed. Kids screamed. Security fled. And there I stood, 50 yards away on the cliff, watching. Not smiling, not angry, just quiet. Carlton stood next to me, blood still drying on his cheek, whispering, "They had it coming." I didn't plan for it to go that far, or maybe I did. But the next morning I woke up to the sound of helicopters, news vans, police sirens, FEMA, tents rising like mushrooms in the valley. 35 homes were flooded. 10 were condemned. 2 million gallons of water had surged down a canyon that I legally owned. But now I was the villain. Or was I? Because just 2 days later, something happened that made the entire country turn. Carlton, bruised but bold, released the footage. The slap, the HOA warnings, my court filings, the forged signatures. And that's when the world saw me not as a madman, but as the last man standing. For what was right. But this was just the beginning, because that dam, it wasn't the only thing I'd built. And Glenhaven Estates? They had secrets of their own. By the time the footage went viral, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. But I wasn't touching it instead. I stood beside Carlton under a gray sky as Blackhawk. Rotors beat the air like war drums above Glenhaven's shattered remains. And below us, FEMA engineers and news crews crawled over the wreckage like ants, unaware that less than 100 yards behind them, in the untouched forest, sat a steel crate buried 6 feet down, one I hadn't opened since 2011, back when I still believed in courts, permits, and due process, and before I had to draw maps with exit routes, evidence files, and most importantly insurance copies of everything they ever stole from me, including the transfer documents, surveillance tapes, and land surveyor recordings proving this HOA wasn't just corrupt, it was a front for a laundering operation. The government moved fast, too fast within 12 hours of the flood. I was placed under civilian investigative restriction, which is fancy for house arrest without calling it that. But joke's on them, I wasn't in the house anymore. I was in the bunker under the old rock oven, the same one my grandfather used to hide tools during the draft raids. And from that spot I watched Glenhaven crumble, not just physically but socially, because when the footage of Carlton getting slapped by AOA Baird aired on national TV, people started digging, and when they did, they uncovered the HOA's President Benjamin Rourke had 3 different LLCs, one of which received $2.3 million in land acquisition advances from a foreign bank in the Caymans just 2 months before they purchased my property. Now the same people who were handing out HOA lawn signs were burning them on their driveways in Rourke. He went underground, literally disappeared from his estate in Tucson, leaving behind a $180,000 Porsche, 3 unlocked safes, and a note that simply read, "I told them it wasn't stable." The FBI stepped in, or at least that's what they claimed, because the men who visited me next didn't wear badges. They wore desert camo, no insignia, and when they knocked on my cabin's front door, I watched through the live drone feed from a signal I ran through a tree-mounted relay. And when they got no answer, they left, but not before placing a laser tripwire across my front gate, the kind only used for covert monitoring. Carlton was the only one still coming to check on me, limping up the back path with his old Springfield, rifle slung across his back, shaking his head as he said, "They're building a narrative, boy. They're gonna paint you red, white, and insane." And he wasn't wrong within days. Headlines shifted from "Local man reclaimed stolen land" to "Lone Arizona veteran floods community and anti-government stunt." And every talk show started asking the same damn question. Was it justice? Or terrorism? That's when I knew it wasn't about the dam anymore. It was about control. And they were going to bury me with everything else they couldn't explain. So I went to the steel crate, unlocked it, and pulled out the 2 items I never thought I'd need again: the burner phone registered under my Honduran alias Lazaro Cruz and a USB drive labeled Trigram. You see, before all this land dispute, before Glenhaven, before the dam, I spent 14 years contracting overseas for geodefense. Firms mapping regions for water access and terrain control, and during that time, I learned 2 things. 1, real power never wears a name tag, and 2, the people pulling strings never worry about lawsuits, they worry about exposure. And that USB? It contained the blueprint of Glenhaven's full operation, because 2 years ago, when I saw initial road grading, I'd embedded spy mics along their drainage zones, solar inverters, and even a gifted HOA printer that copied every document to my server automatically. I sent the drive to a contact I hadn't spoken to since Bogota, encrypted with a cipher only two of us knew, the opening lyric to my father's war ballad. Played backwards in Morse. Within 6 hours he responded, "They'll come hard." 72. Hours clear perimeter, burn cache, so I did. I pulled up the floorboards of the trap bunker, opened the fire vault, and burned every soft copy, every diagram, every written log, because now it was no longer about building a case. It was about surviving what came next, and what came next wasn't peaceful. On the third night, a black SUV pulled up near the collapsed Glenhaven sign. 4 unmarked men stepped out, and 2 of them began scanning the woods with thermal scopes. What they didn't know was I'd buried decoys made from livestock heat packs across the ridge, triggering false signatures. When they walked toward the south bluff, a signal tripped, sending a silent alarm to Carlton, who loaded up and met me at the blind trail by 3 a.m., eyes wide, whispering, "It's not cops, it's something else, military but privatized." Turns out Glenhaven wasn't just a housing scam. It was a land flip conduit tied into a dry pipeline meant for lithium water. Diversion contracts had already been signed by Arizona State Energy and Minerals Division, quietly approved through a backdoor permit while I was overseas, and once my dam was gone, their pipeline could have pulled 10,000 gallons daily into a nearby lithium processing hub, worth millions in futures, but now that was all under floodwater. And guess who was the only living obstacle that could testify to that? Me. So when they started hunting, I stopped hiding. I made a video, the real story told with no edits, no theatrics, just facts, maps, deeds, and files, and I posted it using 4 different proxies to platforms they couldn't touch. Within 48 hours, it had 4.3 million views. Thousands of veterans, landowners, and lawyers began reaching out. Offers came from documentary crews, whistleblower advocates, even a retired senator. But not all support is safe, because the more exposure I got, the more the heat increased. Then came the letter. No postage, no markings. Just one word typed on a gray sheet. Evacuate. Carlton was already packing by the time I found it. "We don't run," I said. He looked at me, dead serious, and replied, "It's not about running. It's about living long enough to win." So we made a choice split up. Carlton took the original land deeds and hid them inside an abandoned post office in Prescott Valley. I took the last resort, a manual trigger built into the canyon's second gate. A flood was bad, a landslide. That would rewrite the whole valley. And as I stood that night on the edge of the cliff, watching the floodlight beams crisscross the darkness like silent threats, I realized something. They didn't fear me because of what I did. They feared me because of what I knew. And now, the final move was mine. But would I pull the last trigger? Or would I use their own game to destroy them from the inside? 3 days after the anonymous letter arrived warning me to evacuate, I stood at the base of an abandoned grain silo 30 miles from Glenhaven, using a stripped antenna dish to redirect a private broadband beam into a decommissioned satellite uplink Tower Y, because I had just intercepted a data packet showing Glenhaven HOA's last internal server logs, and what I found made my blood run cold: a hidden subfolder marked BioDAAviv, storing drone footage of every resident's heat signature, purchase, logs, phone metadata, and one chilling tag across my file: active risk, primary threat, engage if escalated. They weren't just planning a cover-up, they were preparing a hit. The faces I saw in that feed weren't HO volunteers or rogue contractors. They were former Blackwell PMC operatives, hired under a now-defunct mining contract in Yemen, retasked domestically under shell corporations linked to Rourke's Caymans. Funnel and their presence in Glenhaven made everything 10 times darker. These weren't law enforcement, they were trained ghost operators, specializing in quiet extractions. My dam wasn't just a symbol anymore, it was an act of war to them. I needed a way in, not just digitally, but physically and to do that, I had to become something I hated, invisible in plain sight. That's when I called the only man crazy enough to help Wes Ramirez, ex-cyber unit, now working as a deepfake animator out of a survivalist commune near Mojave. I traded him a box of pre-2000 silver coins and a favor from Honduras, and within 48 hours he produced an ID badge, uniform, and digital trail, making me look like a Department of Environmental Safety analyst sent to survey flood mitigation and structural evaluation in Glenhaven's restricted zone. Dressed like a pencil-pushing tech inspector, I passed through 2 internal perimeters without a blink, clipboard in one hand, sonic scope in the other. The HOA's emergency command tent was now run by a private task force calling themselves SafeLink. But behind their khaki smiles I saw holstered Sig Sauers, encrypted coms, and muscle twitch that only came from combat reflex. They had no idea who I was yet, and I used every minute wisely, scanning their mainframe console with a Spectrum data wand that streamed everything back to my backup server at the silo. What I found: staggering blueprints for a third-stage expansion project extending 400 acres beyond Glenhaven's borders, land that included 3 state-protected waterways, none of which had permits. Then I saw something that nearly dropped me, an internal memo dated 4 days before the flood, stating, "Acquire Phase 3 with or without legacy claimant consent. Legal contingency already approved." That meant they had planned to take even more land. Mine was just the start, but they didn't plan for the flood, and now they were scrambling. Suddenly, my comms unit buzzed with a private alert. "Carlton down, ambushed, recover packet." My pulse slammed. I ducked into the maintenance corridor, ditched the uniform behind a broken generator, and took the supply tunnel out to the perimeter on foot. 40 minutes later, I reached the coordinates near Prescott's abandoned post office, Carlton's fallback spot. But I was too late. I found him slumped against the rusted rear door, blood on his ribs, face pale, eyes barely holding on. "They took it," he whispered, coughing, "the black case. But I hid the copy, east of the canyon ridge, under the old mile marker stone." He pressed a half-burned patch of paper into my hand. Then he lost consciousness. I radioed. "Wes on the encrypted line. Carlton's down. I'm retrieving final copy. Go dark after transmission." Then I ran. The canyon ridge was silent, eerily so. No cicadas, no breeze. Just the weight of what this had become pressing down like judgment. I found the mile marker, a broken stone from the 1930s. Highway path, and dug with my hands until I felt metal. A waterproof pouch, inside, the last surviving evidence copy. Land deed footage, HOA internal video logs, Rourke's Cayman wire transactions, private guard transcripts. This wasn't just evidence, it was a nuke, but I wasn't home free. As I slid the pouch into my satchel, I heard it boots, quiet, trained, coming fast. I dropped, rolled behind an old juniper, and pulled my sidearm, a SIG P229, passed down from my father. 3 men emerged, 2 in tactical gear, 1 in a suit with an earpiece. "He's here," the suited man said. "Bag or body? Doesn't matter." They were here to end it. I moved, first tossed a decoy grenade I'd rigged with flash pellets, and took off toward the west drop, feet pounding, blood surging in my ears. I could hear them behind me, silent, efficient. No wasted breath. I reached the edge of the drop, a 40-foot cliff down to the flood basin, and jumped, landed hard. Twisted my knee, but I moved, crawled, bit back pain, and vanished into the tall reeds as the hunters circled above, flashlights slicing the dark like lasers. When I finally made it back to the silo, bleeding and shaking, I uploaded the final packet through a military-grade frequency hopline into 5 press inboxes and a secure vault drive monitored by 3 legal firms in 3 countries. I also sent it to The Forge, a military vet-run whistleblower site known for publishing raw corruption without spin, within 12 hours. It went live. News headlines exploded. Caught laundering through land scam. Whistleblower floods. Development to stop illegal lithium deal. Blackwater ties discovered in Arizona housing expansion. I didn't sleep. Not for 2 days, but I didn't need to. Because for once, the system bent. State agents raided Glenhaven. Rourke was captured on the Utah border. SafeLink was declared an unauthorized domestic contractor. Several of its members were arrested. Carlton survived. Barely, but he did, and I walked out of the silo with a beard, a limp, and no regrets, because I had done what no one else would stood against, the silent machines that grind the innocent down. But this wasn't over. Not yet, because 2 weeks after the dust settled, I received a letter. No sender. No mark dot inside it, a photo dot, my dam dot, drained dot, dried dot, destroyed dot, and underneath it, one sentence burned in ink. We take everything back. The morning I found the dam drained, I didn't scream or curse or throw fists at the sky. I just stared, dead-eyed, into the cracked dirt bed where water used to pulse through rock like blood in a vein, and I knew instantly this wasn't a message. It was a declaration, a war cry written in silence, the final move of cowards who couldn't beat the truth with law. So they buried it under bulldozers and steel plates, and as I knelt down and touched the dry stone, it hit me. They didn't come to erase land. They came to erase legacy, because when they drained that dam, they weren't just destroying water. They were trying to wipe out everything my family ever stood for. And that's when I decided I wouldn't fight back with lawyers or exposes. Or another flood, I'd burn their name into history with fire they couldn't put out. First thing I did was head straight to Carlton's cabin, which had become our new safe house, reinforced with a makeshift EMF dome, signal jammers in the chimney, and a panic vault in the pantry we built using Cold War plans he'd kept since the 60s. When I got there, he was already on the radio with Wes, tracking chatter on alt channels that mentioned my name too many times to ignore. And when I walked in, he didn't ask what happened. He just handed me a cup of coffee and said, "So what's the play, son?" And I answered with 3 words: "We flip Rourke." Rourke was in custody, held in a private facility under protective watch. But that wasn't for his safety, it was to keep him from talking, and thanks to an old marshal favor I cashed. And from back in my contracting days, I got the transport route Thursday, 2 a.m., private van transfer to state holding, 1 security escort, no federal witnesses. I didn't need to break him out, I just needed 5 minutes alone in that van. So I pulled a page from their playbook and staged a decoy accident. Carlton launched an EMP drone over the highway that fried electronics in a 10-yard radius. Just enough to disable the transport van's dash and drop it into the ditch off County Line 8. And before the guards could call it in, I was already there, pulling open the door with a hydraulic jack and staring Rourke straight in his bruised, terrified eyes. "You talk," I said, "or you disappear like your HOA charter." He tried to smirk, but one look at my eyes told him I wasn't bluffing, so he cracked, not all at once, but in a slow, disgusting unraveling, spilling the details of every deal, the shell companies in Belize, the falsified land auctions, the lithium bribe from Dynacor Minerals, and the orders to silence dissenters by force. And when he finished, I asked him one final question: who drained the dam? And he hesitated just for a second. But it was enough for me to know the answer wasn't in that van, it was bigger dot, so I let him go, not out of mercy, but strategy, because sometimes the best way to expose a snake is to follow the trail. It slithers on, and within 2 days, Rourke was back under official watch, and I was following the digital breadcrumbs he dropped, anonymous pay logs, remote contractors, off-the-books flights, and finally, the name we never expected to see, Wallace Kent, current deputy director of the State Energy Board, former partner at Glenhaven's original development firm, and the man who signed off on the destruction of my dam under emergency hazard mitigation. 2 hours after the last flood footage aired, Wallace was the puppet master, and now I was going to burn his theater down. I didn't go to the news, I went to the people. I started a live stream, not flashy, not theatrical, just raw me, standing in front of the dry dam bed, holding Rourke's confession. The drone footage, the internal memos, the state permits, everything, and I told the truth, not the courtroom version, but the street version. They took my land, they built homes on it, and when I fought back, they called me a terrorist, then drained the very dam they said I was wrong to flood. And now they're covering it up from the top, so I'm asking you not to march or shout or repost, just listen and decide what kind of country you want to leave behind. Within hours it went viral, 5 million views, then 10. Then 20, hashtags exploded, news crews arrived. Protesters lined the old access road to Glenhaven with signs that read, "Water is justice," "This land was stolen," and "Stop state theft." Wallace Kent issued a statement claiming I had falsified evidence, but then Wes hacked a secure Zoom call between Wallace and Glenhaven's surviving board members, and the transcript killed their narrative like a bullet to the heart. The damage is done. Just get rid of the reservoir and we'll finish the lithium tap before winter. That was the death blow. Within 3 days, Kent was indicted. Rourke took a plea deal and gave up the entire hierarchy. The charter was dissolved. SafeLink lost its license. Glenhaven was evacuated. But justice doesn't come in headlines. It comes when a man can walk his land without fear, and that's what I did 6 months later, when they handed me back the deed in court, and I walked the dirt path back to the cracked remains of my dam. Where new water was already flowing from fresh spring roots I'd quietly redirected during the investigation, because while they drained the surface, they never knew about the subterranean split pipe that rerouted runoff through a second basin hidden, protected, and still mine. Carlton stood beside me that day, arm around my shoulder, both of us in silence as the sun set behind the trees. And for the first time in years I felt still, not because the fight was over, but because I knew the land had memory, and now it remembered the man who didn't let it get erased. But just before we turned to head back, Carlton looked at me and said, "What happens when the next HOA comes knocking?" And I smiled, then pointed at the new dam I was building bigger, smarter, rigged with sensors, backups, and a manual override system that only I knew how to trigger because they might come again. But next time, I'll open the floodgate without warning and let justice flow faster than ever before.